Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Monday afternoon. A little bit depressed, a little bit sad, a little bit mad. Honestly, a little bit of all the above because the Giants ended up losing last night. And if you guys want to listen to what happened in the football world over the weekend, we have so many football podcasts that are going live. We had one that went live an hour ago about our football host is back. He was recently sick, and that's why you guys weren't being able to tune into those, in case all of you guys were wondering. And hold on, I'm just going to adjust the audio on this. There we go. So, and then there's also a sports podcast that happens directly after my basketball podcast. So for any of you guys who are interested in anything sports related, it's going to mainly be talking about football, but I highly recommend tuning into those podcasts. Very interesting to hear a lot of people and their takes on what's going on in the football world, what's going all the news that's either breaking out or just a recap of all of the games that went down. But yeah, definitely not feeling so good about the previous game at all. It's amazing that I'm even here on this live right now and not crying in the corner over there. But we're going to talk about basketball. So in the first segment, we're going to talk about Donte DiVincenzo and his little fight with the Knicks and Jalen Brunson's dad. So we're going to talk about that in the first segment. Then in the second segment, I'm going to list off some NBA trades that I felt like should have happened, but for some reason they didn't happen. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about that. And, it's a lot of hypothetical because some of these trades, they could have probably happened. Some of them really, there's no way in heck that they could have happened, but there is a possibility. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Then in the third segment, we are going to be talking about the players and the NBA stars in particularly who are under the most pressure going into this season. And then in the fourth segment, we're going to do our preseason recap. There were so many games that happened over the weekend, even though there was football happening over the weekend, as well as the Friday game. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the fourth segment. And we also have a special fifth segment that I reveal at the end of the fourth segment. So be sure to stay tuned for that if any of you guys are interested. And before I begin with the first segment, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, or something that you've just been dying to share. We are all ears. If you really want your comment or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. Just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. If Super Chat's not really your thing, then that's okay. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way as well using gsmcspodcast.net. That's the link that you use to send in your comments and or donations. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is gsmcspodcast.net for any of you guys who are curious. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this first segment, which is talking about DiVincenzo and not Jalen Brunson, but Jalen Brunson's father. They got into a little bit of a fight after the end of the game, and it's very confusing. Not entirely sure whether or not this fight had anything to do with the trade, because DiVincenzo did not want to be traded. Like, he's never vocally said anything about wanting to be traded, not to mention the fact that, playing with all of his former teammates this time, it would have been a real treat for him, but sadly the Knicks had other ideas for this, and they had other plans. So this is the first time that DiVincenzo played in Madison Square Garden since he got traded, and he had to be separated from the Knicks assistant coach, Rick Brunson, yes, Jalen Brunson's father, after a very heated exchange in the preseason game. And it's only the preseason, and already we're starting fights. Like, that's a little bit wild. So players and coaches, they were shaking hands, and then, obviously they were celebrating the fact that they ended up winning in this crucial game. And hold on just 1 second, let me just go ahead and turn that down. And so obviously there was a little bit of a verbal dispute like after the game, and DiVincenzo apparently, like, he was told that there was a quote or that people have seen him said, I was talking to Thibs, like DiVincenzo was heard saying on camera to Rick Brunson at one point. And then the post-game exchange occurred after DiVincenzo had already been shown on camera at the free throw line shouting towards the Knicks bench earlier in that game as well. So there was also a lot of lip readers. They ended up deciphering what he was saying, and they said, that's what happens when they let you run the show, DiVincenzo said 2 times before shooting a free throw during the first quarter. And he declined to specify who he was jawing with on the New York bench and suggested that he initially was enjoying an inside joke with the Knicks coach and Tom Thibodeau. So in terms of the post-game exchange with Rick Brunson specifically, DiVincenzo declined to comment and said he'd prefer to talk things out privately with him. And the moments involving DiVincenzo, who finished with 15 points and 7 assists, in some ways overshadowed the fact that it was Karl Anthony Towns' first game against his former team of 9 seasons. And 2-time All-NBA forward Julius Randle's first time being back at the Garden after spending 6 years with the Knicks. And Towns ended the game with 16 points as well as 16 rebounds, while Randle was still rehabbing from his right shoulder injury. And during the first time out, Knicks played a video in the arena's Jumbotron honoring Julius Randle as well as DiVincenzo because, they were fun while they lasted. And DiVincenzo was a key member to the last season's Knicks team who broke the franchise record for 3-pointers in a season, started at Villanova alongside Brunson, Hart, and Mikal Bridges. I'm sure all of you guys have already known this, but this little exchange between Brunson and DiVincenzo, I feel like it's a bit of banter. I don't know exactly how to explain it because this sort of feels random, and it doesn't have anything to do with the trade because I feel like, DiVincenzo did not want to get traded, and I'm sure Brunson didn't want him to get traded either, but I feel like this is just sort of banter between between this coach and between this NBA player, and it's really I don't know how to describe it. It's unnecessary. That's really the first thought that comes to my mind. There shouldn't be any bad blood between those two people, especially considering the history that they have, not just with not just the relationship of being in the NBA, but also even before that when they were all in college, because obviously DiVincenzo must have known or at least talked to Jalen Brunson's father at least at some point. I mean, they're teammates. That's sort of the expectation, and I'm honestly very surprised that this was sort of what happened and what resulted towards the game. But I mean, towards the end of the game, and it's very odd. Jalen Brunson even had his arm wrapped around DiVincenzo and served as his groomsman in the Knicks in his wedding. So during a chunk of the post game verbal exchange, I really don't understand what the purpose of it was. And Jalen Brunson said, quote, I was right there when asked if he saw the exchange, and apparently his words were that it was words of affirmation, between the two. And my relationship with Jalen, that's my brother and my best friend, DiVincenzo said. That's a separate relationship. I'll talk about that privately and figure everything out, but it is what it is. And again, it's I don't know exactly what could have been said that was so bad that it needs to be discussed privately, and I feel like it's just banter. I don't know why. I just feel like it's friendly banter that these two tend to do. That might be the relationship that these two have, and maybe the banter went a little bit too far at one point. Maybe that's sort of why the exchange even happened. It's very confusing. We're most likely not going to know the reason of this, but if things don't get resolved, I wouldn't be surprised if we'll see another brawl like this between these two teams in the regular season, even though I feel like fights like this in the NBA are absolutely pointless. Given what the refs allow you to do now, if you get into a fight like this, you're just detrimenting your team, and not to mention, you're not even going to do anything afterwards. It's all just for show. All of these NBA players that get into fights, it's literally just to create some drama And it doesn't help the team. It genuinely does not help either side, because you should be focused on the game. You shouldn't be focused on trying to pick a fight with someone that you're inevitably not going to fight. Like, a lot of people, there's several examples of this with Joel Embiid. Like, Joel Embiid would start to pick a fight with somebody shorter than him, or the other way around, and it amounts to nothing and really just wastes time and probably results in 2 free throws for Joel Embiid. But it's like, I don't understand why these fights happen in the NBA. We know you're not going to do anything. We know you're not going to, after the game, you're just going to go about your business. And then after the game, you're probably going to get fined. You're going to get chewed out by the coach. And, like, it's just bad news after bad news. It makes absolutely zero sense to fight in the NBA now. And apparently, Anthony Edwards had some things to say about this as well. And he said, "You can't be mad at him, man." Edwards said, "He makes all the right plays and shoots the cover off the ball. New York is definitely going to miss him." And the other Timberwolves acknowledged feeling this fair share of emotion over the course of the night, too. Edwards called Towns his brother, while Minnesota coach Chris Finch said it would take a while for it to feel normal seeing the big man wearing a different uniform. And there was also another quote from Finch saying, "It's like a death in the family in some ways," which is very dramatic now that I think about it. You got to make it through that first year and everything is going to be a little odd. Once we get started, it'll be business as usual. And I really feel like that's just a little bit of a dramatic quote. I mean, nothing can compare to a death in the family. And comparing a trade to a death in the family, especially with Karl Anthony Towns, I don't really think it warrants for that kind of reaction. But then again, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Maybe you guys think something completely different. So that's all that I have for the first segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the second segment, where I talk about some NBA trades that I felt like should have happened during the offseason, but ultimately ended up fizzling out or didn't even get considered. So I'll talk about that right after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in the second segment, we are going to be looking at some NBA trades that I felt like should have happened, but ultimately ended up not happening for whatever reason. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that in this second segment. Before I begin, though, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show. Whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, or just anything that you've been dying to share, we are all ears. If you really want your comment or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Super Chat's not really your thing. That's totally fine. You could always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment as well, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Really helps the show, makes it more interactive between myself and you guys. And let's go right ahead and dive into the segment. So these trades, again, it's not necessarily that they were going to happen, but I feel like it's trades that inevitably should have happened for the better of either team. So it's like, depending on what team I'm talking about, it's going to end up being better for one team than it most likely will be for another. So the first trade that we are going to talk about is going to be about the Wizards, and in particular, trading away Kyle Kuzma and Malcolm Brogdon to go and play for contending teams. Now, why do I say this? So the biggest move that Washington had in this offseason was trading away a 23-year-old Deni Avdija, forgive me if I messed up that last name, over to Portland in exchange for Brogdon and some draft picks. The Wizards also ended up acquiring the veteran center Jonas Valanciunas, and they still have Kyle Kuzma. So this is, why should this trade happen? This is because I feel like the Wizards are sort of at a point where they should be getting younger and selling off veteran players in order to acquire draft capital and upcoming talent in the NBA. I don't think they should be getting older, but here they are making moves that make the roster full of veterans. And I understand, like, the roster is relatively young and they do need some vets, but still I feel like they should be getting even younger than what they are already. Like, I mean, they're only going to get older with Kyle Kuzma and Jordan Poole in the roster. And, like, again, you can easily get rid of some of these players in exchange for some draft capital. And Brogdon, he's 31 years old, and he already spent all of last season with the Portland Trailblazers trying to rebuild after the following Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard trades that inevitably saw him leave all of his teams. And so Kuzma, he's 29 years old, and right now in the prime of his career, averaging 22 points per game, 6 rebounds, and 4.2 assists. And the Wizards should have, like, sent Brogdon away this summer to a contending team in exchange for some draft capital, because, like, what real use do they need Brogdon for? Like, what exactly is he going to accomplish with this team? This team already has low expectations. Having Brogdon on the team isn't going to increase the expectations at all. So the fact that they have low expectations, they were one of the worst teams last year. In fact, in my opinion, they were worse than the Pistons last year. Again, that's a pretty bold take, but it's not like it's unfeasible that they would be worse than the Pistons, because in my opinion, they really are. And he's also going to be sidelined following a thumb surgery towards this offseason. Kuzma should have been worth a future first-round pick, preferably the one that's upcoming in 2025. And Washington should have held on to Brogdon and moved their vets instead. And it's really, like, it genuinely just doesn't make sense that they're still holding on to Kuzma when Kuzma's just wasting his time over there. It's sort of like, it's a similar situation with, like, Tobias Harris when he was on, I believe it was the Clippers at one point, and then once he ended up getting traded over to 76ers. It didn't turn out all that well with the 76ers, but the Clippers did have the right idea in exchanging some draft capital and trying to acquire some younger talent in the trade with Tobias. But could it still work? Like, yes, but it's going to be at a cost. Like, Brogdon's stock is going to be much lower now that he has a torn ligament and in his right thumb this past weekend and is recovering from surgery. The Wizards could still trade him at the deadline, though his value is probably going to be lower since he's on an expiring contract and could leave his new team in a few months. So it's not like, it doesn't really make sense to trade for him later in the season if you are a team that's going to, like, be in trade talks with the Wizards. And Kuzma is going to be in a lot of trade rumors coming up to the February 6th deadline, I have no doubt. But he's going to be competing for touches with Jordan Poole, Valanciunas, and the number 2 pick, Alexander Sarr, and a lot of others like Tyus Jones. And, I feel like, obviously, Jordan Poole is not going to be able to get traded. His contract, no one is going to want to pay for that. Especially now with the second apron, and nobody's going to even want to spend all that money on a mediocre guard. Like, less than mediocre guard. I'm sorry, Jordan Poole's shot selection is, like, one of the worst I've seen. It's arguably worse than Kobe Bryant, and Kobe Bryant took some very, very, very questionable shots. But he could do that because he's Kobe Bryant. Jordan Poole, on the other hand, no. Now, next trade, the Pelicans. I feel like the Pelicans should have traded away Brandon Ingram over in this offseason in exchange for a starting center. This has been a very popular problem for the Pelicans. I mean, now that they let Valanciunas walk in free agency, they're in need of a center. and they don't have one. And you kind of need a decent enough rim protecting center in this league. And it's not like Brandon Ingram has had as big of an impact on the Pelicans as I would expect. I really expected him to take a leap in not just efficiency, but also production. And he did, he is producing at a pretty solid rate. But again, I feel like it could have been a little bit better. Now, according to Chris Herring, it was no secret around the league that New Orleans was reluctant to give Ingram a max extension and made the one-time All-Star available this summer. And an Ingram starting center trade swap it makes a lot of sense, given that Valanciunas left to the Wizards, and the Pelicans had to use Daniel Tice as a starter in their first preseason game. Now, New Orleans, they still need to work out an extension with Trey Murphy as well, and it doesn't have an ownership group that's willing to pay all that luxury tax. So the situation is really it hasn't been settled yet. So could this still work? Could this trade still happen? There is a chance that Ingram gets out to a strong start, begins to shoot more threes, and increases his overall stock in trade talks. And the Atlanta Hawks want to move Clint Capella as well. And if Onyeka Okongwu looks ready to take over, then I wouldn't be surprised if they want to get rid of Clint Capella. And Nick Claxton is also an option. From the Brooklyn Nets. He will become trade eligible in December 15th. So there are options available for the Pelicans if they're willing to do a mid-season trade and try to acquire a center. And it's also worth keeping an eye on Miles Turner as he enters into the final year of his contract with the Indiana Pacers, a team that is already paying 2 players a max contract. So maybe this is just, a waiting game for the Pelicans. Next, this is probably no one is shocked about this one, but Zach LaVine being traded away. And I feel like he probably should have been traded to the Clippers. They do seem like the team that is in need of a shooting guard that can score. They do have Harden, but Harden is nowhere near the same kind of player that he was previously. And Kawhi Leonard is still recovering from his injury. So obviously, following the Paul George signing with Philadelphia, the Clippers have been in need of a spark to give this franchise some sort of hopes of a playoff run. And now with Kawhi Leonard possibly missing the beginning of the season following another procedure on his knee, which is a very big problem for him, by the way, they can't really rely on the 35-year-old James Harden to carry an offense by himself. This isn't Houston Harden anyway. So LaVine is healthy and played in the Chicago Bulls' first preseason game, but at age 29, he doesn't fit a rebuilding franchise that just swapped Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey. So he's also 2 years removed from his last All-Star game, and I feel like he would bring a lot of needed change to the Clippers, to a team that needs to win, given that OKC have the rights to their pick swap in 2025 in the first round. So they definitely need to win. Otherwise, if they end up fizzling out and losing, the Clippers might get a higher pick in the 2025 draft, thus making the Oklahoma City Thunder that much better. And could this trade still work out? Of course it could still work out. But is it going to? No. For some reason, this Chicago Bulls team, they always say they are going to trade Zach LaVine, and they end up not trading Zach LaVine. It does not make any sense. So the quickest way to reach a Zach LaVine's $43 million salary number is by combining the contracts of Norman Powell, PJ Tucker, and Terrence Mann if you are the Clippers. And Mann recently signed a 3-year, $47 million extension, which means he's no longer eligible to be traded until the 2025 offseason. Los Angeles can try to get to cobble up more salaries together, but players like Derrick Jones Jr., $9.5 million, and Batum, $4.6 million, can't be traded until December 15th after signing with the Clippers in free agency. So this is a trade that could be executed in a few months, but would be nearly impossible to pull off at the moment. But again, it is possible, just very, very unlikely. Now, the next player, Lauri Markkanen, and he was in trade talks. A lot of Warriors fans were expecting they were going to get Lauri Markkanen in the trade. And, he should have been the biggest name on the trade market had the Utah Jazz decided to make him available. And there were a lot of people that really wanted Lauri Markkanen. It did seem like the Warriors did have the best chance, and he would fit that system rather well. Now, this is also the perfect time for the Jazz to dive headfirst into a rebuild and a shot at a top draft pick in a loaded 2025 class. However, they're hovering between 31 and 37 wins, which isn't enough in this Western Conference. And the past few seasons have resulted in 2 missed postseasons and no draft pick higher than the number 9 overall. So trading Markkanen to Golden State should have given Curry a true number 2 scoring option, given the fact that Klay Thompson left in free agency. And it would also allow the Jazz to tank and have a better shot at trying to get Cooper Flagg in this draft. So could this still work? No, it cannot. Lauri Markkanen ended up agreeing to a 5-year, $238 million contract and an extension that added $24 million in the salary for this season alone. So there's absolutely no way that the Golden State Warriors will even be able to have enough cap space without needing to pay off that second apron luxury tax. And that's something that a lot of owners aren't going to want to do. And the Warriors aren't going to bother trying to do that for a player like Lauri Markkanen. So they missed their window of opportunity for that to happen. It seems like Utah is going to be stuck with Lauri for a couple of years. And I don't know if that's going to spell good news or bad news for this team. And finally, we have a Lakers trade. And I mean, the most realistic option that I could see for the Lakers trading is between either Trae Young or somebody like LaMelo Ball. Basically, a point guard, and a very solid point guard at that. And like, this trade should have happened because the Lakers, they lacked any activity in the offseason. They did absolutely nothing in the offseason. And running it back with the same roster isn't really that ideal if you are the Lakers. I mean, like, yes, you do have a new coach, so maybe this new coach can implement new things and bring spark to this offense that previously wasn't there in the last few seasons. But honestly, like, it's really just, I mean, the lack of doing anything from the Lakers is very appalling. Running it back with the same roster, minus Taurean Prince, Spencer Dinwiddie, along with Donte, and adding Dalton Connect and Bronny James, that loss in the first round of the playoffs when LeBron James is about to turn 40 doesn't really bode well for the Lakers' title chances this season. And, trading for a guard that is, a pretty solid option, it makes sense. Could this still work? I mean, with LaMelo Ball, it could totally work. But with Trae Young, I don't really think it's going to work. And I don't think that the Atlanta Hawks are going to really give up Trae Young that easily. And especially now that it seems like Zachary, the rookie that they acquired as the first overall pick in the draft, he's showed out in the last preseason game. So if everything falls into place, then maybe Trae Young is going to stay on the roster. But Charlotte's front office, they drafted LaMelo Ball, and like, the front office that drafted him is no longer in place. And if the franchise gets off to a rough start, there might be some incentive to trade the point guard in an attempt to get a number 1 pick in a loaded 2025 draft. And the Lakers, they could offer him D'Angelo Russell's expiring contract, future first-round picks, and more in the deal for LaMelo. And that would probably provide a lot of spark on this team. And, I mean, let's face it, LaMelo throwing lobs to LeBron, that would be awesome. But I also think that maybe LeBron is in his head like, I already played with a Ball brother. I don't want to play with another one. But who knows what the thought process is. So that's all that I have for the second segment. So now we will go ahead and go into the third segment where I talk about some NBA stars who are going to be under the most pressure in this season in the NBA. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be talking about some NBA stars who have the biggest expectations and the biggest pressure going into, the most pressure, going into this season in the NBA. So this list was inspired from a list that CBS made. And I amended a few things, and obviously I want this to be my list and my opinions. So I took some of these players as inspiration, and yes, I do think that all of these players on this CBS list, I do feel like they do have a lot of pressure going into this season. However, I do think that the order in which they're in is incorrect. So I'm going to go ahead and start off. So the CBS, they think that Karl Anthony Towns is under the most pressure under any superstar. I completely disagree with that, and I actually think that the players, it's more than one in the number one, because I feel like they're both under the same amount of pressure. The two stars on Philadelphia, Joel Embiid and Paul George, I feel like these two, I cannot decide between which of these two is under the most pressure going into this season, but I feel like, so that's why I have these two tied at number one. I feel like Joel Embiid and Paul George, they really, they're under so much pressure this season, especially Joel Embiid, mainly Joel Embiid, and a little bit of Paul George. So Paul George, he wasn't brought to Philadelphia to be a number one option or even a number two option with the idea that he's not under immense pressure to perform, but he is the guy who's supposed to get the Sixers over that hump. That is why they signed for him in free agency. That is exactly why. To get over that second round exit problem that they always have. And with the amount of money that they're going to be paying, patience is not a luxury that he's going to be able to have with these fans. And he's going to be making $212 million on his contract at 34 years old. So he's not really, and on top of that, his playoff performance is also incredibly lacking. He's had a history of underperforming in the postseason. Yes, he did lead the Pacers to an Eastern Conference Finals, and he also led the Clippers to their first Western Conference Finals in the franchise's history. But even aside from that, his play in the postseason overall is rather underwhelming in recent years. And George is, he's going to be judged immensely on his playoff performance, and Philly is going to do everything it can to keep Joel Embiid healthy, meaning more is going to fall on George's plate throughout the regular season. And even if he's, not even a number two guy, even if he's a number three guy, he's not going to be some corner shooter tasked with some big shots in the game. He's going to have the ball a couple of times, and they're going to have to figure out how to share it between all three of those players, all three being Joel Embiid, him, and Tyrese Maxey. But I really do feel like Joel Embiid, of any superstar in this season, is going to be under the most pressure. And, really, Joel is notorious for being bad in the postseason. I am sorry to say this, but Joel Embiid cannot get past the second round. He's always injured in the postseason. He always performs a little bit less than what he usually does in very crucial games. And it's really, it does not make any sense. He's the only MVP in the history of MVPs that has never been able to make it past the second round. And a lot of people, I argue that he shouldn't have even won that MVP to begin with, but that's a completely different conversation. He is going to be under the most pressure because he has a roster, he has a lineup that is good enough and great, arguably great, to win the championship this season. If he does not get over that second round problem that he always has, it's just going to be another failure with Joel Embiid. This whole trust the process thing it should be dead. It should be cooked, done. It's just pitiful. It's bad. It's not anything to be proud of if you're Joel Embiid. And it's really he also tends to throw his teammates under the bus at times when he himself isn't he's not perfect. He has his own problems, and even when he would throw some of his teammates under the bus as if he should be ignored from some of these problems. It's just a very bad attitude in my opinion, and these two are definitely going to be under the most pressure in this offseason. Or in this season, excuse me. Now, the next star on this list, he isn't in second for CBS. He's first. It's Karl Anthony Towns, but I do agree with CBS in thinking that Karl Anthony Towns is going to be under a lot of pressure. And he hasn't really been a portrait of poise and stability throughout his career. What does that mean? Well, he's very, very inconsistent, especially in the postseason. And he got a lot of backlash for completely disappearing in the big moments for Minnesota in this postseason. In fact, in the first postseason that he played with Minnesota, he had 5 points in an elimination game. That's not ideal if you are trying to be, because he was a second option on that team. Jimmy Butler was the first option for that Minnesota team. And if he lays in a couple of, if he has a couple of games in the playoffs where he chokes and he underperforms with New York, forget about it. He's going to be scrutinized by every New York fan out there. And he's going to be under a lot of more pressure because he's playing in the Garden. It's very, very difficult to play in the Garden, especially if you are a Knick. There's so many eyes on you. There's so much media coverage on you. Any little thing that you do wrong is not going to get unnoticed by the media. So, this trade, it did make sense for the Knicks from purely a basketball standpoint. He fits perfectly in the system, but when the Knicks aren't playing two bigs, or if Mitchell Robinson ends up getting traded, he will have to be an interior anchor in the postseason for this team. And it's about more than just making shots, which he really just doesn't do all that well in the postseason. And every single night he's going to have eyes on him. And he'll still serve as a number 2 scorer and making threes at a rather high clip. But in that postseason, he's going to be under a lot of scrutiny. When he was on the Timberwolves, he was just a ghost in the postseason. It's like Aaron Judge when he plays baseball in the postseason for the Yankees. It's really bad. And I don't know if this is just a common, I can't even say it's a New York thing because he was doing this when he was on the Timberwolves. This is known. And he has to get over that bugaboo. Part of the reason why the Knicks got rid of Julius Randle, was because of the lack of playoff performance that you get from Julius Randle. So it's really that was the only problem that I really had with this trade. The fact that they traded away a not good playoff performer for another not good playoff performer, even though Karl Anthony Towns fits the system a little bit better than Julius Randle did. Next, player that is under the most pressure is going to be Trae Young, without a doubt. I mean, his value is and his talent and just the overall value that he brings to a team, it's fantastic. It's definitely one of the more underrated point guards in this league. But the truth is, nobody is really going to be worried about the Atlanta Hawks this season. And no one is really going to be trying. I don't think anyone is going to be trying to acquire Trae Young in any sort of trades. He makes max money, dominates on offense, and is just god-awful on the defense. And the offensive part is justified in a vacuum, yes, but and he is one of the more talented point guards. I think he's better than Tyrese Halliburton, in my opinion. And he's nearly impossible to keep out of the paint. And he just knows how to find a good shot. I mean, actually, no. He knows how to make good shots. And finding good shots is a little bit, it's inconsistent. I will say he likes to jack up a bunch of 30-footers, which I don't really think is that consistent, but all power to him. He is rather good at that. But it's like, where is this going to, how is this going to work for this Atlanta Hawks team? I don't really fear the Hawks. I think they're just going to be another mid-tier team like they've always been. And he's great enough to have this, is he great enough to just be good on the offensive side of the ball? Like, is he the Luka Doncic kind of player? And is he prime James Harden? Obviously, he's not. And a lot of these teams feel that he is, because if you do have a chance to trade for that kind of player, you do it. And there's a chance to trade for Trae Young this summer, but nobody has really, like this previous summer, there was a chance to trade Trae Young, but nobody was really budging for that. And Young's actual three-point shooting actually falls short and has consistently fallen short in a lot of seasons. And that's like really one of the second best aspects of his game. I think his passing is like the best aspect of his game, but his three-point shooting should be the second best. But it's not like he's a sniper out there. And he has the range, and that also impacts the spacing and the overall attention that he gets, which allows him to make a lot of these passes. But this inefficiency that he has, it's like if he's not dominating on the offensive side, he's going to hurt you on both ends of the floor, because not only would he be missing shots on offense, but he cannot guard a paper bag on defense. I don't know why I said a paper bag, but he couldn't even guard a cone on defense. But aside from that, it's really that's really the main problem. The fact that he has to be laser focused on offense and hyper efficient on offense to even get considered in the trade talks, because his defense is lacking immensely. It's not like with Brunson, where it's like Brunson is rather inefficient, but he, like, at times he can be inefficient, but there's more times where he's extremely efficient and puts up immense production, more so than he's inefficient and doesn't put up immense production on the offensive side of the ball. It's really like, and they sort of have to stick with this kind of player if you're the Hawks. And if Zachary can actually develop into that caliber player that the Hawks need, then maybe everything will fall into place with Trae Young. So who knows? And the next player on this list who's under the most pressure is Damian Lillard. Obviously, the Bucks, they acquired Damian Lillard in a trade with the expectation that he was going to mesh well with Giannis Antetokounmpo. But it's not like we got that in some games, but we didn't get that in a lot of other games. I really expected this duo to be similar to Kobe and Shaq in a way. Like, not exactly like Kobe and Shaq. Don't attack me, Laker fans, but similar in a sense. Obviously, you have a guard that's really dominant in the pick and roll, and you have a center, or a big man, because Giannis, he could be center or power forward really, who's just as dominant. Shaq even says that Giannis is almost as dominant as him. And when you have this kind of combination, you usually expect a deep run. But injuries and overall just not good performance and mediocre performances, and Doc Rivers being your coach, it's not ideal. It's not a very good situation. So, not to mention the fact that Damian Lillard sort of fell off from his production in Portland. Like, he was not the same player that he was on Portland. So, they did not trade for him to be mediocre. They really need him to sort of step up and be that same player that he was on Portland, and mesh well with Giannis Antetokounmpo, especially now, because they're going to need him against the Boston Celtics if they match up in the postseason. And I'm going to go ahead and speed run a little bit through this because we are running low on time. Next player is Jamal Murray for the Denver Nuggets. It does sound strange because he is the only guy on this list that has a championship to his name. He dropped the triple-double in the finals, but overall in the postseason, he's only been dominant against the Lakers. I don't know what it is. You can look at the shooting splits, but this man is just a freak of nature when he goes up against the Lakers. His true shooting jumps to 10%. It jumps like almost up to 10%. His field goal percentage, it increases exponentially. His shooting in the fourth quarter is like 70% when he goes up against the Lakers. That is egregious. That's like unheard of. He turns into Michael Jordan when he goes up against the Lakers. But every other team, his production and his efficiency is just meh. It really does not make any sense. I don't understand. Like, again, he did have his best regular season of his career last season, and he averaged a career high in points and assists, as well as three-point shooting. And then he became the first player in history to hit multiple game-winning shots inside the final seconds of the same playoff series. So, yes, he is a very fantastic player. But overall, he was not close to the Jamal Murray that we expect in the postseason. Again, this kind of performance, he only really does that against the Lakers. And he made just 40% of his shots, including 31% from three. But against the Lakers, he makes like 45% of his threes and 53% of his shots. It's egregious. It's ridiculous how his three-point shooting and his shooting just gets so much better in the postseason against the Lakers. It doesn't make sense. And now that Denver got rid of KCP, he sort of needs to step up and be that kind of player. Like, he's never been selected for an all-star team. And, you know, for a guard that has a championship ring under his belt and was arguably in the contention for finals MVP, that is not ideal. That's really, like, it's not something that you want to brag about. But that's all that I have for this third segment. So now we will go ahead and go to the fourth segment, where I skim through every single game that happened over the weekend in the preseason. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, because we are a little bit low on time, I'm going to skim through every single preseason game that ended up happening over the weekend, so starting from Friday all the way over to Sunday. And again, it's going to be a quick skim just because we're low on time. Normally, I would dissect every single stat and every single important player on each team, but I'm not really going to do that unless it's like, you know, a game that's like really big for the postseason and got a lot of attention. So I'm just going to skim through a lot of it, and it's going to be rather brief, I hope, just for the sake of time. So on Friday, October 11th, the Warriors ended up beating the Kings 109-106, a very close game for the Warriors. The Warriors are 3-0 in the preseason, and the Kings, they're 0-2 in the preseason. Moses Moody, he ended the game with 23 points, was the leading scorer for the Warriors. And for the Kings, the entire starting lineup was in double digits. De'Aaron Fox ended with 19 points. And, of course, Stephen Curry, he played only 16 minutes, however, so obviously not going to play all that many minutes in this game. He didn't really shoot all that well, and that's going to be it, because that's basically like how fast I'm going to skim through a lot of these games. So pay attention real quick for any of you guys who are just casually listening. So the Wizards ended up beating the Raptors 113-95 on Friday again. And Kyle Kuzma was the leading scorer for the Wizards. Then the leading scorer for the Raptors was, of course, Scotty Barnes, in my opinion, one of the more underrated players in today's NBA. And a very useful player to acquire in fantasy for any of you guys who play that. And Pelicans and Magic game was postponed due to that crazy hurricane that's going on over in Florida. Timberwolves ended up playing the 76ers. They won 121-111. And Timberwolves, the leading scorer was Naz Reid. And for the 76ers, Paul George was the leading scorer for the 76ers with 23. Oh, my bad. Naz Reid for the Timberwolves ended up scoring 19 points. I apologize for that mistake. Pistons ended up beating the Phoenix Suns 109-91. And the leading scorer for the Pistons was Cade Cunningham. He ended the game with 25 points, 12 rebounds, 9 assists, almost a triple-double. Played 31 minutes for some reason in this preseason game, but I digress. And the Suns, Kevin Durant had 24 minutes, ended up scoring 18 points. I believe he scored all of these 18 points off of just one dribble. Not entirely sure, but I was watching a lot of his a lot of the highlights, and I only saw him dribble once, which is very, very impressive. And he also ended up shooting 7 of 12 from the field. Obviously, Kevin Durant's very efficient from the field, especially in the mid-range area. One of the better mid-range scorers in this league. The Clippers ended up beating the Blazers 101-99. Derrick Jones Jr. ended up being the leading scorer for the Clippers with 16 points. Portland Trailblazers leading scorer was power forward Toumani Camara, who ended the game with 19 points and 9 rebounds as well in 31 minutes played. Now, that was all of the Friday games. Now we're going to move on to Saturday games. So the Spurs ended up matching up against the Utah Jazz. They ended up winning 126-120. And Jeremy Sochan ended up getting 15 points and acquiring 8 rebounds as well in this matchup. And hold on just one second. I want to try and find this. There was one player on Keldon Johnson. So I want to just point this out. Keldon Johnson from the bench scored 20 points. And there was at one point when he dunked the ball, he looked like a prime Westbrook. And I know a lot of you Westbrook fans are going to get mad at that. But let me explain myself. He wears number 0. He has a tapered fade. He has the arm sleeves. He did his signature tomahawk dunk. And he has the same charisma after Westbrook when he dunks. And I mean, that looked like, if you squint your eyes just a little bit, that looks like Russell Westbrook. But I just wanted to point that out just because I thought that was rather interesting. And then Colin Sexton for the Utah Jazz ended up scoring 24 points in this game, playing 31 minutes. Again, I feel like this team should be in a rebuilding state, but that is besides the point. Celtics ended up destroying the 76ers at home, 139-89. I mean, this is what happens when you're Boston. You always beat the 76ers. It's just a trend. It just happens. Jason Tatum ended with 16 points, 10 rebounds. Jaylen Brown ended with 18 points and 8 rebounds. They were both the leading scorers for the Boston Celtics. And Jared McCain, surprisingly, was the leading scorer for the 76ers in this matchup. Paul George and Joel Embiid did not end up playing in this game, and neither did Tyrese Maxey. So, I mean, great job for the 76ers and not trying to get their players injured. And then the last game for Saturday was the Grizzlies going up against the Chicago Bulls. Grizzlies ended up winning 124-121, and Jalen Wells ended up scoring 24 points for the Grizzlies in 32 minutes. And for Chicago, Zach LaVine ended up scoring 28 points in 22 minutes. A very highly efficient game from Zach LaVine. He went 6 for 6 from 3. And if this was a regular season game, this would increase his trade value, but of course it's not, so blah. As you guys know, the Knicks ended up beating the Timberwolves 115-110. Not going to talk about that game all that much. The Warriors played the Pistons on Sunday. These games that I'm going over now happened yesterday. Warriors won again, 111-93, and the leading scorer for the Warriors was none other than Lindy Waters III, coming off the bench, 13 points in 19 minutes. And the Pistons, they did play Cade Cunningham, but he wasn't the leading scorer. It was actually Jaden Ivey, ended the game with 19 points, but Cade Cunningham was 1 point behind him with 18. And next game was the Miami Heat going up against the New Orleans Pelicans. The Heat ended up winning 101-99. Leading scorer for the Heat in this matchup was Tyler Hero as well as Duncan Robinson. They both ended with 12 points, and they both shot rather efficiently from the field as well for the Miami Heat. And the leading scorer for the Pelicans was Zion Williamson, who ended up getting 13 points in 17 minutes. And of everybody in the starting lineup, he ended up playing the least amount of minutes, but still ended up being the leading scorer. So there's a little bit of knowledge from any of you guys that wanted to know about that. The Trailblazers ended up beating the Sacramento Kings. Kings have yet to win a preseason game, which is a little bit concerning, but I do understand that they aren't using DeMar DeRozan. Actually, no, I lied. They did use DeMar DeRozan in this game, and he played 30 minutes for some reason. I'm very surprised that he played 30 minutes. Shot 4 for 10, ended with 8 points. Absolutely terrible. And Alex Len ended the game with 13 points, was the leading scorer for the Kings. But for Portland, the leading scorer was Scoot Henderson, who ended the game with 17 points. Celtics ended up beating the Toronto Raptors. What else is new? Lonnie Walker, the fourth, ended the game with 20 points, was the leading scorer for the... Actually, no. Drew Peterson was the leading scorer for the Boston Celtics with 23. And another honorable mention, Jordan Walsh ended the game with 16 points and 10 rebounds. Toronto Raptors, their leading scorer and arguably their best player was Jacob Poeltl in this matchup. He ended with 14 points and 13 rebounds. And yep, he was the leading scorer for the Raptors. And the final game over the weekend was the Suns going up against the Denver Nuggets. Nuggets have yet to win a preseason matchup. Kind of surprised at that. Jokic was in this game, played 30 minutes, ended with 21 points, 14 rebounds, and 9 assists. Still, they could not come up with the win, even with this amazing performance. Michael Porter Jr. ended the game with 21 points. And Jamal Murray, since he wasn't playing the Lakers, ended with 2 points, and he played 19 minutes. However, he did end up, let me see, what did he shot? He shot 1 for 6 from the field. So, yeah. Unless Jamal Murray's going up against the Lakers, he's really not going to be. He's not efficient, and I don't understand why. Diggs, by the way, 7 in the chat. Hey, what's up? Nothing much right now, just going over the preseason games. And to cap it all off, the Suns, the leading scorer for the Suns was Ryan Dunn, as well as Monte Morris. They both ended with 20 points. And those are all the preseason games that happened over the weekend. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the 5th segment where I talk about the WNBA Finals. I'll just briefly recap what went down over the weekend, how the series is playing out, as well as the plans for the WNBA going into the future. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the 5th segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this 5th segment, we are going to be giving an update on the WNBA and their new playoff format that they're going to introduce coming into next season. So the WNBA, they announced that the finals format is going to be changed. So instead of the finals being a 5-game series, now they're going to make the finals a 7-game series. And I mean, it's really about time. Obviously, Caitlin Clark getting into the league, it does have some sort of effect on this new format being changed. And, I mean, the change is going to happen instantaneously. Next season, that's going to be how the season is going to be structured. It's going to be 7 games in the finals. And this definitely wouldn't have happened had Caitlin Clark not have been drafted last season. And if there was no other athlete that was like Caitlin Clark, then there wouldn't have been this change in the playoff format. That wasn't the only thing that the playoff format changed, however. Now the first round, which is the first round has always been a best of 3 series. And it's always going to be like that for the WNBA, I think. And however, the format for the best of 3 series, it was incredibly unfair, in my opinion. So how do I put this? You play 2 home games if you're the higher seed. And then the final game, if there is a game 3 necessary, you play at the away team. So essentially, in order for the lower seed to even have a chance, they would have to steal a game. And I mean, a lot of the postseason series ended up ending in a sweep. And a lot of it could have been due to the fact that, the lower seed, they were forced to play away 2 times in a row. Meanwhile, the higher seed was forced to play home 2 times in a row. And I understand, like, I mean, if you are the higher seed, then you should have home field advantage. But the 1-1-1 format that they're coming up with, so what that means is high seed plays 1 home game, then the low seed gets their home game, and then finally the last home game would be awarded to the higher seed. So it'll be 1-1-1. That's why it's called 1-1-1. And it guarantees that all playoff participants have at least 1 home game in the postseason. And this is definitely something that I felt like it should have been put in place already. It was very odd just seeing that the postseason for the first round was a 3-game series. And on top of the fact that, you know, the away team, the lower seeded team, had to go and steal a game in order to even have a chance to play at home didn't really seem all that fair. And some people are going to argue that, you know, this is sort of what you should expect if you are the lower seeded team. You're not going to have an advantage in the postseason, and I understand that. But I feel like having both of these teams host a playoff game is not really more so like to give credit to the team with the lower seed, but more so to appeal to the fans, especially all of the Indiana fans who wanted to see Caitlin Clark play at home in the postseason, but was unable to do that because her teammates were just awful. Kelsey Mitchell, goodness me, I could write a paragraph at how much of a detriment she's been for the Indiana Fever. Would not be surprised if she ends up getting moved in the offseason. She should get moved in the offseason. She just takes all of the attention on her. The ball, she's such a ball hog. I swear, it really it irks me how much of a ball hog she is, because she'll do all these tween crosses that create zero separation, and I'm just like, give the ball to Caitlin. This ISO ball that she plays isn't winning basketball, but I could be here forever if I continue to rant. They also ended up changing the regular season format. So now there's going to be 44 games in the WNBA in the regular season, as opposed to there being 40 games in this 2023 and 2024 season. So the WNBA champion is going to have to play at the very least 53 games with 44 regular season contests plus 9 playoff wins. So most likely the eventual champion will play more than the minimum 9 playoff games that are required. The team could also compete in the Commissioner's Cup Championship, which means that the 2025 WNBA champion could approach 60 total games played, which is quite the gauntlet if you are a WNBA team. And it's this is sort of the expectation that the WNBA is finally going to be able to generate enough profit to actually have these kind of games and, do these sort of things. And they have Caitlin Clark to think about it, to thank, And, obviously, a lot of the WNBA veterans are going to be like, this wasn't because of Caitlin Clark, this was going to happen anyway, but, that's a completely different conversation. So that's really it with the playoff format. So I'm going to go ahead now and just give a little bit of an update of what's going on in the finals with the WNBA for any of you guys who are interested. So I didn't cover this previously because I figured no one was going to really care that much since Caitlin Clark isn't in the WNBA. And I'm not saying that just because, I don't care about the WNBA finals. I am saying that because the numbers have shown that the WNBA playoff viewership has tanked ever since Caitlin Clark got eliminated. And, the value and the attention that she brings, it's there regardless what these veterans would say. And it really doesn't matter what they say, in my opinion. I think they're all just a bunch of haters. But aside from that, the Lynx, they ended up stealing game 1 from the Liberty after the Liberty held a huge lead. They ended up choking that game. And the Lynx, they won 95-93. Brenna Stewart missed the game-tying layup that would have probably sent the game into another overtime. And, it was really just she missed badly, by the way. It was a very, very bad loss for the Liberty. And they took that very personally, because in this next matchup at home, they beat the Lynx 80-66. And now they have tied the series 1 game apiece. However, now the Liberty, they have to sort of try and steal a game if they want to keep their hopes alive, because going down 2-1 in the finals, especially now, since the Liberty, they have to play 2 away games, and they have to win at least 1 in order to, be able to close out the series in a comfortable manner. by playing the final Game 5 at home. So really, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for the Liberty, because I don't think the Lynx are going to be a team that is going to take advantage of their home playoff games. So it's really like they're going to have to be laser focused if they want to win this matchup. So the next game is going to happen on Wednesday at 8 o'clock on ESPN for any of you guys who are interested. But that's all that I really have, and that's the final segment for the show. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, or anything that you've just been dying to share. We're all ears. If you really want your comment or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. Just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Super Chat's not really your thing. That's totally fine. You could always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you could send in your comments and or donations that way. That is all that I have to say on this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.